What's up, everybody? John the Morgow here. Gonna do a holiday special debunking of what I believe or appears to be the guy that almost made it to be Malcolm in the Middle, but unfortunately the other guy got it. No, I'm just kidding. It's the name of the channel, and I'll put a link in the description, is Cosmic Skeptic, but it is pretty uncanny. Anyway, Cosmic Skeptic did a quote-unquote debunking of one of ODD TV's videos, top 10 or 10 proofs of a flat Earth, and basically what he does is just shows his level of ignorance and confirmation bias and inability to skeptically analyze the spherical Earth model that everyone believes. And the first portion of this, Malcolm in the Middle, sort of gives himself a BJ. So I'll just zip through that, and then we'll get to the meat of it. But I will sort of interject along the way to show how he doesn't prove curvature or axial rotation in the slightest, doesn't even attempt to do so, and you'll find that is a typical trait of any flat earth debunking video. They always sort of attack the arguments and argue semantics and things like that, which I'll also show, instead of even attempting to prove curvature, sphericity, axial rotation, orbital motion, and all of that. So without further ado, we'll roll the video, and I'll put a link to this and link to each of these videos in the description, and hope you enjoy. Happy holidays.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex, and I've just hit 20,000 subscribers. So that's cool. I was really not planning on this happening, or at least I wasn't planning on this happening today. So I would love to sit here and just express fully my gratitude to you. But I've got a lot to get through in this video, so I'm going to save that for my next video, which is going to be a Q&A to celebrate 20k. So if you have any questions, if you want to know my favorite food, or why I reject the one true God Almighty, leave it all in the description below or on my social media.
If you didn't catch that last part, basically what he said was, since he got 20,000 subscribers, he's going to answer questions and answers about himself. And one of the examples that he gave is why he would reject the one true God Almighty, which is so I guess he would be an atheist, right? Or I don't know. I think atheists don't believe in God, so I don't think you can technically reject something that you don't believe exists. However, that's rather a foolish thing to do, because the creator is self-evident. I mean, if you actually press an atheist on how did the universe begin, even the best of them, like Richard Dawkins, don't have an answer for that. They all believe in the Big Bang Theory, but that, of course, we all know the laws of physics, that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So that means that everything, all the energy and matter in the known, quote-unquote universe, came from somewhere, and atheists don't have an answer for this. And when you look at things like DNA, which are complex code, it is self-evidence of a coder or an artificial designer that is far superior to us lowly beings. And I find it very foolish for somebody to crassly say that they reject the one true God Almighty, which that really doesn't make any sense as from an atheistic standpoint. So wow. Anyway, okay, so we'll get into the crux of the arguments, where he goes through 10 flat earth arguments from ODD TV and tries to debunk them and fails miserably. And again, he just shows his inability to skeptically analyze his own belief systems, which happen to be fallacious.
Or why I reject the one true God Almighty.
Leave it all in the description below or on my social media. I'll answer as many as I can in my next video. But on to more pressing matters, I need to make an apology. I'm sorry, okay? A little while ago, I made a response video to a guy called Pastor Greg Locke. And in part of the video, I said that in regards to the scientific accuracy of the Bible, that the Bible implies that the Earth is flat, and that it's actually round, and therefore the Bible is probably inaccurate. But I've just come across a YouTube video, and it turns out that, well, at least according to this video, the Earth is actually flat. So yeah, I'm really sorry, I got that one wrong.
even though you're obviously being a facetious, sarcastic 12-year-old girl, that is probably the one true statement in this whole video that you make. Although it is tongue-in-cheek and sarcasm, the fact that the Earth is flat, I wouldn't necessarily say proves the Bible, but it certainly discredits the hundreds of year, running argument that since the ancient goat herders of the Fertile Crescent thought that the Earth was a stationary plane, then the rest of the Bible must have also been inaccurate psychobabble of idiots. And, that has been a pretty long-going argument. And the fact that you apologize for that because the Earth actually is flat, even though you were saying that tongue-in-cheek, is pretty much the only honest thing you say in this video, even though you don't actually mean it. So even coming from the mouth of you call yourself a skeptic, but instead what you are is you are a devout follower of the religion of scientism, and that is the opposite of a skeptic. You refuse to consider data and information and repeatable experiments that show your belief system to be totally whack and wrong, which renders you the opposite of a scientist, actually impotent as a scientist, because being a scientist doesn't mean that you believe everything coming from science. What it means is that you follow the scientific method and test hypothesis using logical experiment.
There's been quite a few of you suggest to me that I should tackle some of this flat earth stuff, because I think for some reason it's beginning to sort of pick up popularity, this flat earth society.
The fact that you use the term flat earth society leads me to believe that you have no idea what you're talking about. The Flat Earth Society has been around for a long time, and eventually it became co-opted, essentially a psychological operation to steer people away from the understanding of the truth. The Flat Earth Society sort of puts together preposterous red herring arguments in order to quote-unquote prove the flat Earth, when in fact it is misinformation. The data is there. The jury is out. There is no debate any longer. The Earth isn't a sphere, nor is it spinning, and yet we are stuck with millions upon millions of, Mr. Know-it-alls who simply regurgitate what they've been told in science class their entire lives. And I'm not being offensive. I was right there with you just, about 2 years ago. I would have wholeheartedly agree with you. However, again, what you failed to do at this point is you failed to skeptically, and it is sort of ironic because that is in your YouTube channel name, Skeptic, but you must skeptically analyze the spinning sphere Earth model, and I can guarantee you that you'll find all sorts of issues with it that are sort of explained away by theories, and those theories are not backed by anything other than conjecture and imagination. And in fact, any physical tests to prove these theories always show that they are incorrect. And maybe I'll get into some detail later, but let's continue.
Which, if you don't know, is basically people who believe that we live on a flat Earth rather than a globe. And I recently came across this video called Flat Earth in 5 minutes, and it's actually a really good quick summary of pretty much all of the significant arguments for flat earthers.
That's extremely disingenuous because it's just 10 things. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of proofs that the Earth is not a spinning sphere. It's never moved a single yard. There's no curvature. It's not orbiting. There's just a never-ending pile of empirical evidence to show this. And these are just 10 things in 5 minutes. And for you to say that these are pretty much all of the arguments for flat Earth is ridiculous, is disingenuous, and you should probably retract that, because if you don't retract that claim, then you're lying.
And I'm not any kind of expert. I've watched quite a few of these videos about flat Earth conspiracies. They actually really interest me.
No, you're certainly no expert, and I would also say that it's not a conspiracy. So many youngsters these days confuse the words conspiracy and theory, and it's really sort of ironic, but the globe Earth hypothesis is a theory. The Earth happens to be a stationary plane, so it's the truth. But you call it a conspiracy in order to sort of subconsciously discredit the truth to yourself and to people watching this. And I'm not saying you're doing this on purpose, but it's just sort of been rooted into our culture to automatically associate the phrase conspiracy with theory when the two things are completely different terms. They don't mean anything, like one another. A conspiracy is when people get together to hide things, which has occurred in the case of NASA, but there really isn't that big of a conspiracy. However, really the term flat earth theory doesn't even do it justice, because the truth cannot be classified as a theory since it cannot be proved as false, which you fail to do.
But I'm just using sort of common sense and logic here. I don't have an extensive knowledge, so I'm just going to sort of go through this video and see what I can come up with.
So you admittedly don't have an extensive knowledge on the topic. You refuse to consider the points that are made and merely regurgitate what you believe. So how again does this qualify you to refute anything or debate anything that's brought up here? The answer is it doesn't. You should really actually look into this before trying to debunk it using Wikipedia answers and what you think you know that you learned in the federally run school system.
Water, when unmanipulated, is to find its level. So whether you look at a cup of water, a bathtub, a swimming pool, a lake, or the ocean, it's flat. Of course, natural motion is not considered and doesn't equal a curve.
Now this is an argument that I don't actually hear very much on these conspiracy videos.
There's that term again, conspiracy videos. So what you're saying is the fact that water always finds its level even on, hundreds of square miles of ocean, that's a conspiracy, right? That's a conspiracy. No, it's proof that the Earth isn't a sphere, you freaking moron. Oh, and by the way, you mentioned, this isn't one that I hear a lot from flat earthers. So you don't hear from flat earthers a lot that the Earth is flat, really? Or that standing water doesn't curve? You don't hear that one much, even though that's pretty much one of the first, come on. Give me a fucking break.
Because it's not a very good one when you consider the fact that the Earth is... it's quite large, really. Of course, there's going to be no perceivable curvature when you look at a minute part of the Earth's horizon.
Oh, really? Can you prove that with maths? Can you prove that with maths that you later on proclaimed to be so good at with maths? The fact is, there is a formula that anyone can use, which is 2/3 feet per mile squared in expected vertical droppage due to curvature from any observer. And the fact is, when this is tested for and measured for, it doesn't exist, right? And so for you to claim that since the Earth is so big you can't see the curvature, well, what about when you're looking across a 60-mile body of water and you can plainly see all of the Chicago skyline, when technically the base of the building should be over a quarter mile below the horizon, and the tip tops of even the tallest buildings should be hundreds or even thousands of feet beneath the horizon. This is so typical, such typical ignorance coming from your side of the argument. It just goes to show that you haven't looked into this, and if you actually apply the expected curvature calculations to reality, the curvature that you claim to believe in simply doesn't exist. So what does that make you? That makes you a blind regurgitator of the religion of scientism and scientifically impotent, period.
And when you have pictures of like a glass of water or a bath or something, these things are independent of the Earth's horizon, so of course they're not going to be subject to the curvature of the Earth.
Are you seriously going to use that argument? Give me a break. He obviously wasn't saying that you'd expect to see curvature in a glass of water or a bathtub, you twit. He was making a point that, on the micro level, water always finds its level, but also on the macro level, the oceans and the large Great Lakes, the standing bodies of water, don't curve around a ball. Jeez Louise, oh my goodness.
We have 0 authentic pictures of the Earth and they're all composites, and NASA even admits that they Photoshop Earth images.
It is Photoshopped, but it's has to be.
Okay, I think I've got two things here. Firstly is that if this was a logical argument, it wouldn't actually prove a flat Earth. All it would do is rebut an argument for a spherical Earth.
So what you're saying is if we catch NASA red-handed faking things, we should just believe them about everything?
And so even if your argument is a consistent and logical one, it doesn't actually prove your position. And secondly, just because an image has been altered in Photoshop doesn't imply significant falsehood or deceit. Okay, look at this photo, for example. This image that you're looking at right now has been photoshopped, but that doesn't mean that it's not an accurate representation of reality. All that it means is someone's taken the image into an image editor and adjusted the contrast or the hue or the saturation of it, whatever it may be.
So just covering a couple things that you just mentioned. First, you said even if your argument is a consistent and logical one, it doesn't necessarily prove your position, end quote. So this is actually true to a degree, but your logic is incomplete and very naive. You're conceding that even if NASA is faking space and faking orbit and satellites and all that, it's not really that big of a deal. And in fact, you apparently have no problems with taxpayers being bilked for $20 billion a year just in America alone. And that doesn't even consider the exponentially growing private investments into NASA every single year. If you catch someone or some group or entity lying to everyone, do you think it wise to investigate the claims and assertions of said group, especially when their claims and assertions go into the scientific and historical record as factual, proven science, settled science? Or should we continue believing their narrative, hook, line, and sinker, even though the group is known to forge evidence and lie to everyone in order to perpetuate the status quo and continue their need to exist and increased annual funding? Now, the second thing that she said was this image has been photoshopped, but it doesn't mean it's not an accurate representation of reality. Now, they may have adjusted the hue, saturation, or blah blah blah, whatever. The point that you're failing to see is that is not what has occurred with the so-called pictures of Earth from space. They've done everything from fake them through a high-altitude flight, through a circular window, with all the cabin lights turned off, with the camera panned back to make it seem like you're looking at a spherical Earth.
Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11, calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue gas, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth.
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up to see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window.
When in fact they claimed that the camera was pressed against the window, so they were caught red-handed lying, and to you that's not that big of a deal. But the point that you're failing to see is that's in terms of Photoshop minor tweaks in the hue and saturation, brightness and contrast. That's not what happened. They're not merely making small adjustments, but they're literally forging images completely by compiling strips of data, which is claimed to come from satellites in low Earth orbit. However, when you study this carefully, low Earth orbit is exactly the same thing as high altitude flight. And in fact, NASA claims it is currently impossible to pass equipment and astronauts higher than a few hundred miles above the Earth's surface.
But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
Notice I didn't say the Earth's curve, which means they could compile maps from high altitude flights using Photoshop editing, which goes far and beyond the small tweak in color correction or gamma balance. So we'll get back into it because you do touch on some of these points a little later.
All that it means is someone's taken the image into an image editor and adjusted the contrast or the hue or the saturation of it, whatever it may be. In fact, in doing so, they may have actually constructed a more accurate representation of reality than they would have had if they hadn't touched it at all.
Right, Malcolm, because we all know how a pristine photograph or a pristine video is far less reliable than one that's been edited and touched up and possibly meddled with, right? What are you talking about? I think you've been watching too much CSI, my friend.
Yes, because we all know that a photograph that's been meddled with is much more accurate than the pristine original photograph, right?
Think of it like a panoramic shot. When you take a panorama, all that's happening is you're taking multiple photos and they're all being stitched together into one big photo. The same thing happens with NASA's photos of the Earth. It's very difficult to photograph the Earth.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you that it's difficult to photograph the Earth, but it's rather easy to fake the Earth. I already showed you one example of how the so-called Apollo astronauts faked the Earth from low Earth orbit, which is the exact same thing as high altitude flight. And a lot of people have argued, and I think that there's some merit to this, that much of what you think of as, Apollo capsule footage and whatnot, looking at the Earth through their little window, may have been high altitude balloons. It makes a lot more sense than rockets going through the vacuum of space. If you think about this logically for 10 seconds, it's physically impossible for rocket thrusters or any sort of thrusters to work in a vacuum, as much like airplanes need the ambient atmosphere in order to create lift. A rocket needs some medium to push against, and that medium is the high pressure air found within the troposphere and upper layers of the atmosphere plane, but eventually all rocket launches end up going parallel with the horizon and then perpendicular back down towards the horizon. If you watch them carefully, they don't actually go into space at all. Satellites are unnecessary. I know you like to use the term GPS and say that proves a spherical Earth, but Nikola Tesla came up with technology back in the 40s to support triangulation, GPS, broadcast, transferring, energy wirelessly through the air to, say, power an airplane. So wireless energy, wireless technologies were available prior to even the conception of satellites. And in fact, if you look at military video from the early 1950s, before there were any satellites in space, you'll see what look exactly to be cell phone towers, as well as large satellite dishes, parabolic satellite dishes. And that's because what they're doing is, if they're bouncing anything, bouncing communication signals off of anything, they're bouncing it either off the ionosphere itself or high altitude weather balloons, which can achieve the exact same end as a satellite. Although, and I'll put a link in the description to a video series disproving satellites, because first of all, they're not necessary due to the factors I've mentioned, and they're impossible, by the way, but we won't even get into that. One of the things that you had mentioned was think of it like a panorama stitched together. Now, a panorama, a person can stand there and actually verify what's going on. We have to take NASA's word for it that they're, out there in space doing these sort of very thin angle strips of data, which could be achieved from high altitude flight. And we've seen in the last few years huge advances in Google's capability to do Street View, which is obviously done with cars driving around. But then you also have sort of the air view, and people claim this is proof of satellites. But again, the same exact sort of 2D model of Google Earth could be achieved from high altitude flight or even relatively low altitude drones. And so the whole concept of satellites, if you actually look into this, even humoring the heliocentric model, they're physically impossible due to the velocities involved, which you'll have to look into on your own. Don't just take my word for it. Actually study orbital mechanics, and you'll find that they are a physical impossibility. Even humoring and giving a lot of credit, or just humoring for argument's sake, the heliocentric model, third generation satellite bodies such as the Moon or the LISS are physically impossible, given the laws of gravity and whatnot. But that's for you to do your own diligence. And I realize it's difficult because this day and age, it's physically impossible for people such as yourself to think outside of the box enough to humor hypothetical situations for argument's sake. And so you will forever be stuck in this globe earth believer realm simply because you're incapable of free thought and setting aside your preconceived notions for argument's sake. Now, the other thing that you mentioned was, it's very difficult to photograph the Earth, but again, it's very easy to fake it. And the images that I've been rolling in the background here are alleged, I think it was from the 1990s, alleged animations of the spinning sphere Earth from some million miles away or whatever. But you'll notice this image has been proven as a forgery because the clouds don't mutate or morph whatsoever. They're totally static relative to the ground below them. And I've also intercut about a 12-hour time lapse of proof that clouds don't stick in the same place for 12 or 24 hours. So yeah, it's difficult to photograph the Earth because it is a stationary plane, and so you're never going to be able to actually photograph a spherical Earth because such a thing doesn't exist. And so whether you understand it or like it or not, this is mathematically proven. We're not just taking wild guesses here. The declination due to vertical declination due to expected curvature doesn't exist, and in order to maintain your position as a globe earther, you must show evidence for this as well as axial rotation, for which there is none. And in fact, there's piles and piles of physical repeatable evidence that the Earth itself is stationary, lacking all curvature.
And so of course there's going to be composites, but in doing so all they're doing is creating an accurate representation of the Earth.
So you're making a claim that this meddled with sort of collage of images is an accurate representation of the Earth, yet you have no evidence for that. If you're going to make a claim like that, you need to show evidence for it. What you're doing is you're taking NASA's word for it. You're taking NASA's word for these strips of images being meddled with and compiled together, not just, contrast and gamma and color corrected, but literally stitching together things in a matrix. And that matrix is, of course, going to be a globe Earth matrix. You could apply the same data to a flat Earth matrix or a triangular shape Earth matrix, and the relative sizes and distances could still be captured as long as you have equidistant measurements involved. And so I just think that it's extremely naive and typical of you to make this really pretty hefty claim that the meddled with and stitched together image of the Earth from NASA is correct, and you don't even attempt to provide evidence for that. So a claim is merely a claim. You need to support your claims with evidence, which you fail to do, I believe, throughout this entire video. You just make claims that are in conformity to popular science, and therefore you are correct because Wikipedia agrees.
But I'll grant you this, however unlikely or improbable it is possible that NASA has just completely faked these images. But like I said before, this doesn't actually prove your position, so let's move on.
Yes, I agree. Let's definitely do move on, but I want to make the point that a person to hold your position is just ridiculous, because NASA has indeed been caught faking their spacewalks and faking the moon landings, and if you actually take the time to research this unbiasedly, objectively, you'll find that NASA is a freaking liar. And for you to say that this doesn't prove flat Earth, I mean, that is true, but if NASA can do the things that they claim, and yet they're caught faking it, why would they fake it if it was reality? That's a total disconnect. That, you know, it may be circumstantial evidence. However, we should at least get rid of NASA if they're caught lying to us, which indeed they have been many times. They've been caught faking all kinds of stuff, and that's not that big of a deal to you. It doesn't prove anything. But if you just take this as one piece of the puzzle, and there are many other pieces of the puzzle that are not covered in this video, this is just a sort of rundown, but it is an important point to make that NASA and all of the you know, so-called space agencies, who happen to be proud members of the Antarctic Treaty, are faking space and tricking people and taking our money in order to perpetuate the idea of infinite space and space travel and, you know, aliens and all that other good stuff, when in fact, if they were to actually be honest with us and not use fisheye lenses and CGI and trick photography and water tanks to fake spacewalks, yeah, you can find air bubbles in space if you look into it. It just goes to show that NASA is dishonest, and if you choose to trust dishonest people and not even question what logical, scientifically literate people are telling you to look into, if you refuse to look at that evidence, then that makes you the opposite of a scientist and a dogmatic religious zealot, in fact.
On numerous occasions, NASA admits that we can't go beyond low Earth orbit, which is between 99 miles and 1,200 miles away. The interesting thing is that the moon is said to be 238,000 miles away, which is a difference of 236,800 miles.
NASA have indeed made it quite obvious that to go beyond low Earth orbit is quite inconvenient.
You, my friend, are a liar. Right now, very recently, the Orion program is trying to figure out, and I already rolled that clip, but the Orion program is trying to figure out ways to get people and equipment through the so-called dangerous region of space known as the Van Allen belt, which is essentially ionized plasma, which has just been imaged as of last year. It's long been theorized that there are these sort of plasma tubes that actually run meridianally, or, you know, north to south, all over the world, and such plasma tubes are in the lower magnetosphere. So you're talking about ionized gases, which are extremely dangerous for tin can objects to pass through. And so the claim that NASA went to the moon, you know, back in the 60s or 70s or whatever with the Apollo missions is malarkey, because yeah, it's not inconvenient, it's impossible. And that's what you fail to understand. It is really sort of comical how much of either you're just lying or you haven't looked into this, which is typical for people who cling to the globe Earth model, because again, you are blind, or it's impossible for you to see things outside of your realm of belief system. And that, again, is the opposite of science. Science is supposed to be impartial, unbiased, with controls and no sort of love or marriage to specific theories, but in fact that is what we have with modern theoretical physics. One good example would be the Copernican principle, which is a law of physics that states that the Earth must not have any central or special or unique position in the so-called cosmos, and so that law right there renders all of theoretical physics impotent of realizing the truth that space as we know it isn't this infinitude of stars and galaxies, but space is actually just a secondary feature of the night sky on the Earth.
But it's not impossible. It's really just a cost and safety kind of thing. Without the motivation of something like the Cold War, which arguably was the driving force behind Apollo 11, NASA can't really justify the expense and the risk to the safety of the passengers to go beyond low Earth orbit at this current time.
Oh really? Is that the case? What about the planned mission to Mars? Is that inconvenient? How much more inconvenient is that than going to the moon? And you obviously weren't born in the 70s, neither was I, but NASA claims to have sent in 1972, they claim to have sent the Pioneer 10 mission to Jupiter, which I made a video on that, and it's just a totally ridiculous claim of NASA, and so it's inconvenient now, but because of political conditions, it was justified. And yet, so if that's the case, then why are we still dumping $20 billion of taxpayer money towards NASA every year, not to mention the Ponzi scheme of private investments?
But it's perfectly possible, it's just not something that's particularly preferable right now.
No matter if you're on the ground, on top of a building, a mountain, a hot air balloon, an airplane, or looking at high-altitude amateur balloon footage, the horizon never fails to rise right to your eyes.
Again, do bear in mind that the Earth that we're all on is quite a big one.
Yes, indeed, the Earth is quite big, but that doesn't mean we can't apply geometry to prove or falsify whether or not the inverse square curvature that would be necessary to result in an overall sphere to prove whether or not this exists. And what you're completely ignoring is all of the physical evidence, repeatable experiments, time and time again, that show that the inverse square curvature that you must have to result in a sphere doesn't exist. And this doesn't even begin to touch upon the axial rotation, especially near the equator when you should be flying faster than the speed of sound east, while vertically dropping 135 miles per hour compared to the base point, zipping along that curve. So, yeah, you have a lot to prove, and yet you're just going to pick apart arguments without fully understanding what you're talking about.
You have to go significantly higher than these balloons or even an aeroplane to be able to perceive the curvature of the Earth. But also these photos that you're using, as simple as it sounds, you could just angle the camera down to point at the horizon and choose that as your eye-level photo.
So first you claim that you have to be so high up in order to see the curvature of the Earth, yet one of the Glober's favorite arguments is ships going over the curve of the Earth in just a few miles, so that's just absolutely ridiculous. And in fact, regardless of altitude, the horizon line does stay level. And if you sort of think about this hypothetically, if the Earth was a sphere, you would have to angle down in order to see it. And yet you claim that that's what people must be doing in order to have the horizon remain level. Do you understand what level means? It means that if you have a level camera mounted to a weather balloon, when it goes up, 100,000 feet, that camera is level with the ground, and yet the horizon line remains level with the eye. There is no curvature, but we don't need to go that high up. Again, there's plenty of photographic and video evidence of distant cityscapes 60 miles away, completely visible, when they should be, based a quarter mile beneath the horizon line. So you can bury your head in the sand to all of the actual evidence and just sort of skirt past these arguments without actually doing anything but making claims, unsubstantiated claims backed by nothing but your religion, is so typical. And you think it makes you somehow smart, when indeed it makes you a parrot, a repeater, and a zealot.
These really aren't particularly compelling arguments, but yeah, the Earth is quite big. Let's not forget that.
Whether you are looking at Toronto's skyline from Niagara on the Lake, 31 miles away, Chicago's skyline from Union Pier, 43 miles away, or even Oahu from Kauai, which is up to 108 miles away from center to center, or 73 miles away from the closest points, you will not see any curvature where it's supposed to be. According to the Pythagorean theorem, which states that the curvature of the Earth is 8 inches per mile squared, Oahu should not be visible whatsoever, but you can see the whole thing.
If there's one thing that I love as much as philosophy and science, it's maths. Now, this can get a little bit tricky, but bear with me. If you Google the distance between Oahu and Kauai, you'll come up with a figure of 108 miles. Now, if you input this into a simple Earth curvature calculator, you'll find out that you shouldn't be able to see anything at that distance under about 7,776 feet. And the highest peak on Oahu is just over 4,000 feet, so how on earth should you be able to see the mountain? This is the argument of the flat earthers. But as you've rightly identified in your video, the distance between the closest points of Oahu and Kauai is only 73 miles. And if we input this into the calculator, we get a figure of about 3,500 feet, which means that you should be able to see the top part of the island. But even this is incorrect. In fact, the distance between the highest peak on Oahu and southern Kauai is 83 miles, which is actually longer than your shortest estimate. So if we input 83 miles into the calculator, we'll find that we get over 4,500 feet, which means that again, Oahu shouldn't be visible. But there's one thing that you're not considering, and that's the elevation of the observer. Kauai Airport has an elevation of 153 feet. Now if we input this into the calculator, we finally have the correct figures. We have an observer height of 153 feet, a target distance of 83 miles, and if we hit calculate, we'll find that we should be able to see anything above around 3,000 feet. And like I said, the highest peak on Oahu is around 4,000 feet, so we should be able to see the top of the mountain.
I just think it's rather funny that since you're so good at maths, you need to bust out your little Debunked calculator, but yeah, the height of the observer does come into account. So using your own numbers, the highest peak across the water was 83 miles away. And if you take that from, say, a 6-foot observer, you'd expect a 4,500 foot drop, meaning the entire mountain range, even the tip top of the highest mountain, should be obscured by the horizon. Now, okay, so if we'll go ahead and concede for argument's sake that the Kauai Airport is 153 feet in elevation, then that means you have a horizon distance of 15.2 miles. So we have to subtract that out from the equation. So at 153 feet in elevation, if the horizon is 15.3 miles away, that would be the point where your line of sight should become a tangent to the curve of the Earth expectedly. And that's where you should begin your curvature calculation. Again, as the line of sight would theoretically become a tangent to the curve of the Earth, being the so-called true level, considering a spherical Earth for argument's sake. So you must subtract 15.3 miles from the overall distance of 83 miles, leaving a total of about 68 miles that needs to be squared. So the number 70 originally was closer than what you're using, even though this is, even these numbers are not helpful to the flat Earth. That's the numbers that we need to be using. However, you're still totally wrong. Even according to this 153 foot elevation, meaning the horizon is 15.3 miles away from that elevation, this means anything below about 3,082 feet across that body of water at 83 miles, subtracting your elevation from the equation, anything below 3,082 feet should be obscured by the horizon. Now, you admit that the tallest mountain is about 4,000 feet tall. However, you completely ignore, for some reason, the entire point of ODD's evidence that he was explaining, which I don't know if you did that intentionally or if this is just another example of where you're physically incapable of seeing evidence that debunked your model. Now, what I'm saying is only the top 1/4 of the tallest mountain of that mountainscape should have been visible from that distance. So yet we can clearly see the entire mountain range essentially from the base to the peaks. And the very evidence that you choose to ignore is the very evidence which totally refutes your bizarre brainwashed belief system. I would say I feel sorry for your level of blind ignorance, yet you are the rule rather than the exception, and until you choose to skeptically analyze your absurd beliefs, you'll never have a chance of understanding the obvious, simple truth.
In 1887, Albert Michelson and Edward Morley conducted what's known as the Michelson-Morley experiment. This experiment was attempting to prove the speculated motion of the Earth around the Sun, and when it failed, Albert Einstein was forced to form the theory of relativity to overcome this problem. In fact, anytime mainstream science is faced with undesirable results, they create a workaround, which isn't real science at all.
Now, I've got to grant it to you that some of the quote-unquote arguments that you're using in your video are quite convincing, if logically flawed, but this is just ridiculous. It's like saying, oh, the laws of motion aren't real, you know, Isaac Newton's Principia was just a workaround. Einstein's theories are still today, to the best of our current knowledge, completely logically sound. Is
that so? Are all of Einstein's theories and laws completely and logically sound? You obviously haven't looked into this because Einstein essentially did away with Newton's principles governing things like orbital relationships, which he was commissioned to do. And Newton himself admitted, you know, that this was all hypothetical, probably was not real, and yet mathematically he was commissioned to describe things like orbital mechanics and whatnot, coining the phrase of gravity. And indeed what Einstein did is he did away with a lot of Newton's understandings like the ether and whatnot, and replace that with a theory called space-time, which is where space and time are theoretically linked together in some sort of a fabric, and by large masses such as quote-unquote planets displacing space-time, you get these sort of equal and opposite reactions, sort of like a surface tension, which is what explains gravity in your model. And yet there is no evidence for space-time, there's no evidence for gravity. And again, I have to make this disclaimer, I'm not arguing what goes up must come down, that's an obvious law of physics. Gravity is a theory to explain this, assuming that the world is a spinning sphere. If you take away the assumption that isn't necessary and has been disproven, if you take away the premise or the assumption that the Earth is a spinning sphere, then you no longer need anything like gravity to keep, you know, objects and bodies of water stuck to the side of the sphere spinning at supersonic rates at the equator. It all goes right out the window. And when you realize that the Earth itself is actually a stationary plane and it holds a static electric charge as well as produces an electromagnetic vortex, toroidal magnetic field naturally, and indeed holds a static electric charge almost like sort of a capacitor plate, that gives you everything that you need to have the fundamental principle that governs density and buoyancy, or what goes up and what goes down. It has nothing to do with gravity as a warping of space-time. It has to do with the Earth itself being a natural attractant to higher density objects. It's just a nudge for higher density objects to find their way below lower density gases and whatnot. It's simply the natural order of things. There's no need for imaginative theories such as gravity to explain what goes up must come down, and the fact that people like Neil deGrasse Tyson drop their microphone to prove gravity, yet when pressed they don't know what gravity is a testament to the fact that gravity as you understand it doesn't exist.
Neil, I gotta say, you're totally blowing my mind right now.
That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
This is Star Talk.
What is gravity?
We have no idea. Okay, next question.
And by the way, this is called gravity.
Been tried and tested countless times and continuously proven to be true. There's a reason that Einstein is such a prestigious name in the history of science.
That evolution is a lie!
God damn you, Mac! Yes, please do, Mac.
Now, as you can see, this is the evolution meter, and I've put God, the creator of everything, on the right side, and evolution on the left. I've went ahead and put you guys all on the fence, because of course you're gonna hear out my
Actually, no. Just start where I would start.
No matter, I'm righteous. I'm not gonna stand here, present some egghead scientific argument based on fact. I'm just a regular dude. I like to drink beer, you know? I love my family. Rock, flag, and eagle, right, Charlie? He's got a point. No, he doesn't. What? See, Charlie? These liberals are trying to assassinate my character. I can't change their mind. I won't change my mind, because I don't have to. Because I'm an American. I won't change my mind on anything, regardless of the facts that are set out before me. I'm dug in, and I'll never change.
Mac, look, you're wasting our time. You're not gonna get us to not believe in evolution.
And why is that?
Because the smartest scientists in the entire world all agree that it's real.
I'm glad you brought that up. Because, Mr. Reynolds, science is a liar sometimes.
Oh, boy.
This is Aristotle, thought to be the smartest man on the planet. He believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and everybody believed him because he was so smart. Until another smartest guy came around, Galileo, and he disproved that theory, making Aristotle and everybody else on Earth look like a bitch. Of course, Galileo then thought comets were an optical illusion, and there's no way that the moon could cause the ocean's tides. Everybody believed that because he was so smart. He was also wrong, making him and everyone else on Earth look like a bitch again. And then, best of all, Sir Isaac Newton gets born and blows everybody's nips off with his big brains. Of course, he also thought he could turn metal into gold and died eating mercury, making him yet another stupid bitch. Are you seeing a pattern?
No.
Mr. Reynolds, these were all the smartest scientists on the planet. Only problem is, they kept being wrong. Sometimes.
This is insane, you fool!
I'm a fool because I have more faith in the saints that wrote the Bible?
Yeah, because you just read the words of a bunch of guys that you never met, and you just take it on faith that everything they wrote was true.
And what makes you think what your scientists are writing is any more truer than my saints?
Because there are volumes of proven data, numbers, you know, figures. There are fossil records.
Oh, fossil records. Ah! I didn't even think about the fossil records. I guess I'll concede. Oh, wait, one more thing before I do, Mr. Reynolds. Have you seen these fossil records?
Have I Huh?
Have you poured through the data yourself? The numbers, the figures?
Well, no. I mean, no.
Oh, interesting. So let me get this straight, Mr. Reynolds. You get your information from a book written by men you've never met. And you take their words as truth, based on a willingness to believe, a desire to accept, a leap of, dare I say it, faith?
Come on. Look, I mean, I don't even know how I'm supposed to respond to that. Like, come on. That's a false equivalency.
Just answer the question, Mr. Reynolds.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
I rest my case.
Well, that got me. Yeah.
Frank, do you want me to?
Put me over.
Yeah, all right.
What?
Well, we're going on the fence. I mean, that's a shadow of a doubt.
You actually don't believe in evolution anymore?
I don't know. He created a reasonable doubt. He makes you sound like a stupid science bitch.
Oh, my God.
Yes, it didn't have anything to do with the fact that he beat his wife. His first child's name, the first three letters of the word were L-I-E. He was a patent clerk who stole people's ideas and took credit for them. He dropped out of high school. He was known to be certainly no genius, and yet he was put on a pedestal, stealing people before his ideas in terms of space-time, and taking credit for it. and he was pushed through the mainstream media as this sort of mad scientist, super genius, and did away with all of the rational laws of physics that were described by Isaac Newton. And he did it in just such a timely fashion to discredit the Michelson-Morley-Michelson-Gale sort of experiments that showed that the Earth was stationary and it was indeed the light that was moving in terms of starlight. Yet, to this day and age, people continue to believe that Einstein is some crazy genius who figured out the secrets of the universe when all he did was come up with untested, unprovable, unfalsifiable theories that got away with conundrums in the heliocentric model that were brought to light, again, starting with the sort of premises of the Principia, not jiving with observational science by those like Michelson-Morley experiments, Michelson-Gale, Sagnac experiment, and of course the famous Aries failure.
Because he got it right.
The Sun is claimed to be 93 million miles away, with a radius of over 400,000 miles, but can easily be proven to be much closer and smaller by tracing the crepuscular rays back to its origin in the sky. If the Sun were indeed 93 million miles away, it would simply be impossible to have angled sun rays, as they should all consistently come in straight.
Now this is all completely to do with perspective. Look at this picture of a road. This road is completely straight. The lines on either side of the road are parallel to each other and running in a straight line into the distance. But from our perspective, it appears as though they're getting closer and closer together, forming some kind of triangle to a singular point in the distance.
Okay, so right off the bat, you're applying half-truths and sort of misunderstandings of perspective to patch together your bizarre, nonsensical, preposterous worldview. In this case, it is the convergent rays of sunbeams, or the convergent shadows cast by the sun. And crepuscular rays is one of these excuses that scientism has come up with to explain away the phenomenon that light rays coming from the sun do not appear to be coming in at parallel lines, and in fact, even from high altitude weather balloon footage, when you're well above the troposphere, it shows that the sun is local and casting convergent rays. Anyone who studies the phenomenon of crepuscular rays objectively, without all of the bias and preconceived notions and the 100% belief that this explanation solves it, you'll find that these rays are not in alignment with the laws of perspective, and it's just yet another excuse to explain away the bizarre theory that the sun is 93 million miles away when it is obviously a local light source, or at least the apparent sun is local.
And this is exactly the same thing that's happening with the sun. The light rays are coming in straight lines parallel to each other, or perceivably parallel given how far away the sun is, but because of our perspective and because they're coming towards us, it appears as though they're diverging. Have you ever looked at a meteor shower? Because if you have, you'll notice that in the sky it looks as though all of the meteors are coming from a singular point in the sky and spreading out as they come towards you. But if you understand basic astronomy, you'll understand that a meteor shower is simply flying bits of rock going through the atmosphere and burning up in the sky. And they're traveling pretty much parallel to each other, but because, again, of our perspective, because they're coming from further away and they're starting back here, as they come towards you in a parallel line, it looks as though, as my fingers look like they're getting further apart across the screen, but they're actually traveling in a straight line, they're diverging because of our perspective. And so it may look as though the sun rays coming down from the sky can be angled back to a singular point quite close. If you consider perspective, the sun is actually a lot further away.
Nobody's arguing perspective, but one of the biggest points that you seem to totally fail to understand is the fact that ancient astronomers and even not so ancient astronomers have attempted to triangulate the distance to the sun based on trigonometry. So either spherical trigonometry, assuming the Earth is a sphere, placing the sun about 93 million miles away, or plane trigonometry, assuming the Earth is a plane, putting it between 3,000 and 4,000 miles away. And so the idea of convergent sun rays is a well-known thing, However, you need to plug in the data into one of two matrices. If you assume that the Earth is a sphere, then the convergent sun rays become a proof of a sphere with the distant sun. But however, if you assume a flat Earth, then the convergent sun rays prove a flat Earth with a local sun. And so we need to go beyond theory and maths to test this, but we actually need to go out there and start measuring things objectively as opposed to hypothetically, working out scenarios in our mind without taking the time to actually measure the ground that we've always walked upon for starters. So the point is if you take the time to actually measure for this curvature, which you believe in, the simple fact is it does not exist. So all of these arguments that you're putting forward in terms of crepuscular rays and perspective causing the sunbeams and meteor showers to appear to converge is really just completely irrelevant until you skeptically analyze and prove inverse square curvature of the Earth itself, and up to this point you have not done so, nor have you proven anything of the sort in terms of axial rotation, especially the supersonic sort at the equator. So again, these are sort of straw man arguments. They could go either way, but of course the sun is obviously local. It is only 93 million miles away in your imagination, and until you measure for these things and open your mind a little bit and become a scientist and test hypotheses, you are physically incapable of discerning the truth and scientifically impotent.
According to the globular theory, a lunar eclipse occurs when the sun, earth, and moon are in a direct line. But it is on record that since about the 15th century, over 50 eclipses have occurred while both the sun and moon are visible above the horizon. F.H. Cook, The Terrestrial Plane.
Now, when I first heard this, I thought it probably just wasn't true. It just didn't make any sense.
Aha! You've just proved my point perfectly. You see, any data that falls outside the realm of your really bizarre and absurd belief system is automatically rejected by you because it doesn't fit into your paradigm.
Now, when I first heard this, I thought it probably just wasn't true.
And this is exactly what I've been getting at this entire video, is the fact that rather intelligent people, although you have probably very little life experience and ostensibly live with your parents, and so you haven't really experienced much in your life. Anything that falls outside of the realm of what you've been led to believe and brainwashed into understanding will be instantly rejected as bad data, and so hopefully you will go through the entire logical process of checking premises, checking theories, and ultimately proving things to yourself before jumping on board any sort of theoretical bandwagon. But I did want to make this quick observation that it is rather amusing to me that you would just think something that doesn't conform with your worldview must be a lie, and hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. I'm not disrespecting you. It's a common thing that people do. For example, just one other example, if I tell you the Earth has no curvature, you're going to disagree with me just simply because of your worldview, and yet you will fail to test for curvature. If I tell you that the Earth is not spinning and there's proof of that, you'll tell me that I'm a kook because you know that the Earth is spinning even though you can't prove it. So this is just another one of those examples to where when, for example, you see eclipses, during total eclipses, the sun and the moon above the horizon at the same time disproves the heliocentric model, along with tons and tons of other solar and lunar and celestial observations. But this one here does exist. It's happened many times in recorded eclipse history, and I am rather amused that you would reject this offhand. And now, at least you do go do the due diligence to look into this, but most people, most globbers, would simply reject that and say flat earth theory stupid because such an observation doesn't align with their absurd theory.
But it turns out that, yeah, this is an occurrence that can actually happen. But it turns out this doesn't actually disprove a globe Earth. There's a pretty good article on space.com which explains this, and of course I'll leave a link in the description. And I would attempt to explain it for myself, but I just would not do it justice. I would highly recommend, if this is sort of tripping you out a bit, go and read that article. It clears everything up.
Okay, so what you're arguing is that during a total lunar eclipse, which requires a solar geo-lunar alignment in order for this to occur, you're arguing that it's not that big of a deal that the sun and the moon have been seen above the horizon during such eclipses, and you can't really explain it because you don't understand it, but there's some scientific explanation for it, and we should just take their word for it, when in fact geometrically such a thing is impossible. They claim that it has to do with the way that the sunbeams sort of intersect one another and cause all these weird phenomenon halfway between the Earth and the Sun, and yeah, this really sort of discredits the whole idea of sun rays coming in at parallel angles. But at any rate, yeah, there is this long, drawn-out explanation to sort of apologize for and explain away the impossibility of the sun and the moon being visible overhead during a full lunar eclipse, just so that people such as yourself, who will fail to actually research things and consider things logically, if you can look it up in a textbook or find it on Wikipedia, it's good enough for you. So, you know, for example, if Wikipedia told you that the sky was purple and the moon was made of Swiss cheese, and someone disagreed with you, you could point to Wikipedia and, you know, some publication to prove your point. And since most of quote-unquote science is on your side, you don't even have to prove something. You can just reference something that you don't understand, and in fact does a piss poor job of dealing with the phenomenon.
It's a common misconception that the shadow of the Earth causes moon phases. Even the pastors and priests of the science religion readily admit this fact.
Is this... Okay, I have just spent quite a long time making this response video to this video. Please tell me this isn't, like, satirical. Please tell me this is serious. No, just...
See, what your totally biased ass is failing to realize is the crux of the argument that ODD is presenting. What he's saying is that globe Earth proponents will often use the phases of the moon as proof of a spherical Earth, when hypothetically, technically, this would only work in the case of eclipses. But I'll even roll a clip of a globe Earth proponent using this exact same argument, showing that you weren't paying attention to what ODD was saying. You're trying to debunk him on a point that he was making, that essentially globe Earth proponents don't even understand their own model, in this case, in point being the phases of the moon.
Is round. The second reason, and one that has a lot to do with something we see pretty much every night, is Mr. Moon. How does the moon prove the Earth is round? Because if you look up at the moon right now, I'm not sure what phase it's in, but you'll probably see a curve of a shadow on the moon. Now, if we lived on a flat Earth, there would be a straight line going through the moon because that shadow would be straight. The only way that shadow can be curved is if the world is a sphere, because that's what a sphere does. It has a curved shadow. That's our second example, and it's that simple.
Just check the channel. This is sincere.
The interesting thing about moon phases is that they are always the exact same 8 phases repeated. But if we were circling around the sun, these 8 phases would inevitably be reversed from the summer to winter seasons.
Well, your diagram there is simply wrong. You've got a picture of the sun and a picture of the moon in varying positions around a circle next to the sun, but the lighting that you've given to the moon is just wrong. You have a shadow on, if you look at the bottom moon on the right hand side, you have a shadow on the left hand side, even though the sun is on the left. They should all be lit from the same side. Each one of those moons should actually look the same.
Okay, you snarky little nitpicker. The diagrams of the moon he drew were sufficient to convey a point. You're arguing semantics on something that's irrelevant, and you're not arguing his point, which happens to be a coherent anomaly in the heliocentric model, which actually goes against or doesn't jive with the heliocentric model. And instead of arguing the actual point, you're going to pick apart his diagram. And again, the diagram is sufficient to convey the point, although it might not be technically accurate to a T. It does convey the point of the moon's phases, so that any common person looking at it can understand what he's talking about. So picking apart someone's diagram as opposed to arguing the point at hand is quite a typical globe Earth thing, and maybe I'll put up another diagram, maybe I won't, but because it's irrelevant. The diagram he put up was sufficient, and we can't foresee all of the snarky little nitpicky pro-globers picking apart semantical arguments on diagrams. It's just so totally typical and ridiculous.
The only thing that's changing is the direction from which you're perceiving that moon from the Earth, which would be in the center. And of course, if you picture it in this respect, depending on where you look, the moon would have different phases that wouldn't change depending on where you are around the sun.
And there you have it, folks. Malcolm in the Middle has successfully debunked the argument that the phases of the moon should switch every 6 months based on just basic logic, geometry, and humoring the heliocentric model. You've debunked it by ignoring the evidence and moving right along. Wow. The level of willful ignorance in the globe Earth clingers is quite overwhelming indeed.
I completely understand that the idea of a flattened stationary Earth seems ridiculous in many ways.
You said it, I didn't.
But that's only because we are taught the false globe model from the very first time that we enter a school classroom. Not to mention the first time we are introduced to the concept of a flat Earth. It's depicted as a highly laughable world where ships, boats, and water would run off of the edge. So I do get it, but it's all part of the deception. I've spent 30 years of my life believing that we were on a spinning globe. It wasn't until I unbiasedly and scientifically investigated the flat Earth claims that I started to realize that there is more to this theory than I originally gave it credit for.
And I have to say that this is almost admirable. I'm a huge advocate for questioning everything. You guys know this. I think that there isn't a single thing that shouldn't be open to criticism and questioning. And that includes, living on an Earth that is a globe. That is open to question. The thing that disappoints me is that your analysis seems to be flawed.
Well, your analysis doesn't exist because you still have yet to, and we're getting to the end of this thing, you still have yet to show evidence of curvature or axial rotation. So your analysis is merely regurgitation of what you find in textbooks and on Wikipedia. So you don't even understand the meaning of the word analysis. You understand analysis is reading something that people before you wrote, memorizing it and regurgitating it, instead of looking at things objectively and actually measuring things. There's an old adage where a bunch of scientists were in a room debating the number of teeth that a horse had, and after hours and hours they asked the farmhands to go out and count the teeth. And that's really the best way to discern reality, is to actually measure things without any sort of bent or bias towards one count or one model or another. We should be using empirical data and following the data where it leads us, as opposed to regurgitating what we've read in a book or what's been shoved down our throats since we were toddlers in terms of the heliocentric model.
And you're right, it's interesting to look at this problem from a completely unbiased perspective. I mean, personally, I've done the same thing. When I first came across the flat Earth conspiracies, I thought it was absolutely ridiculous, but then I thought, well, hey, hang on, my principle is to look at things from an unbiased perspective and go by the evidence, so I did so. I said, okay, let's assume I didn't know if the Earth was a globe or flat, and I had no prior conceptions, and I looked at the evidence, and I was convinced of a globe Earth quite quickly.
So you looked at all the evidence, you looked at the fact that there is no inverse square curvature to the surface of the Earth or standing water. You've looked at the evidence that shows we're not spinning, we're not orbiting the sun. You've looked at the evidence that shows the North Pole star Polaris couldn't possibly remain fixed above our axis from dusk till dawn, let alone from season to season. You've looked at the evidence that shows you can't get everything from nothing in terms of the Big Bang Theory, and you fairly quickly became a globe earther, which is very, very easy to do because we've all been programmed our entire lives into believing in this cosmology, and anyone who questions or steps outside of the accepted version of science is instantly labeled as a sort of a heretic to the religion of scientism. So you're in a very safe place to just sort of, in the Matrix sort of analogy, just go ahead and take the blue pill or whatever and go back to sleep in La La Land believing the ridiculous notions of hypothetical physics.
So it disappoints me that the same thing hasn't happened to you, but hopefully through some of the rebuttals that you must have been getting to these arguments that you're making, we can start more of a discussion, because a lot of people will say, a lot of people do say, you know, it's a waste of time to talk to people who believe in a flat earth, it's an insult to the intellect, whatever. But I would say this, I would say that as long as there are people who sincerely believe something which is scientifically inaccurate, I want to do everything that I can to try and change that person's opinion.
I can assure you there are no opinions involved here. This doesn't have to do with some whim and some belief system that we choose to cling to. This has to do with looking at actual evidence, looking at repeatable experiments, and coming to the doubtless, indisputable conclusion that the Earth couldn't possibly be a spinning sphere. And a person that holds your position to the degree that you do proves one of two things. It either proves that you're incapable of thinking outside of the box, which has been ingrained into your subconscious mind since you were, since you started school, or it just means that you're never going to consider alternative hypotheses, which again, that is the fundamental purpose of the scientific method, is to test hypotheses and establish logically whether or not they are realistic or describe reality properly. And unfortunately, you say that you're looking into this, you say that you're questioning these things, yet you completely fail to even mention or even try to debate or rebut the fact that there is no curvature. And again, I thought it was so funny in the beginning of your video when ODD stated that standing water even over hundreds of square miles doesn't curve down away from the observer. You're like, ooh, I haven't heard that one much.
Or the ocean, it's flat and doesn't equal a curve.
Now this is an argument that I don't actually hear very much on these conspiracy videos, because it's not a very good one.
So you might want to look into this a little bit more before taking sides on this one, buddy, because I can assure you that the Earth isn't a spinning sphere, and the more of these sorts of videos that you make, the stupider and stupider you're going to look to future generations once the cat is totally out of the bag. Because that's the beautiful thing about the truth. The truth can never go away. Lies can be perpetuated through compounded lies on top of lies on top of lies, but the plain simple truth will always prevail, because the truth is always going to be self-evident and will never be debunked.
And of course there are some people in the world who will just never be able to change their beliefs, but bear in mind that, like I said before, these videos can be quite persuasive, they can be quite compelling in some circumstances when there isn't healthy opposition.
Videos can be compelling, especially when they're true, and the truth doesn't necessarily need healthy opposition from people who don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. Sure, you can argue this all you want, but yet and still, up until this point in your video, you haven't shown any evidence for curvature or axial rotation, let alone all of the bizarre theories involved with the heliocentric model, including gravity, dark matter, the Big Bang, and on and on and on. I think that where you need to start with your healthy opposition is actual geodetic measurement of the Earth itself. First test for curvature, and then try to do physical experiments, which there are plenty of them that you can do, to prove whether the Earth is spinning. And I can assure you that if you actually take the time to do this rather than just regurgitate what you've been told, you'll find that there actually is something to this and that you have been fooled your entire life. As bizarre as it sounds, and trust me, I was right there with you 2 years ago. I would have laughed my ass off if someone told me they thought the Earth was flat, but that is our conditioning, that's our programming, and it runs very deep indeed. So it is up to the individual, not up to talking heads, to convince people of things. We can present our arguments, but when your arguments are just unfounded arguments for the sake of arguing and not actually tackling the points that prove the Earth isn't a spinning sphere, then it really, you lose all credibility. 20,000 subscribers, good for you, buddy. You're deceiving 20,000 people at least.
And so credulous people might be prone to the danger of adopting these beliefs because there's no serious opposition to them. And if we just laugh these things off and say, oh, well, it's ridiculous, let's not waste our time on them, then people who are beginning to become seduced by flat earth conspiracies, for instance, are starting to go down a very dangerous path. And if there's no serious opposition to pull these people back to reason, then they might just fall all the way down the rabbit hole. And that's not something which I particularly want to have.
So it is your position that without serious opposition to the truth, people won't be able to discern truth from reality. The simple fact is, and I know I probably sound like a broken record, but the reason that people are becoming, flat earth understanders isn't because they're being brainwashed or misled by nefarious individuals with an agenda. They're actually going out and doing experimentation and measurement for themselves and coming back consistently with conclusive evidence that is incompatible with the heliocentric spherical earth model. And again, we're not just taking wild guesses and hyperbole and so much like theoretical physics likes to do. Instead of filling in unknowns with measurement, they'll fill in unknowns with theory. Oftentimes it is very absurd and preposterous theory, but at the end of the day, what we need serious opposition to is people refusing to look at evidence. That's where we need opposition to, because the evidence speaks for itself. And if you've got people grasping at straws and trying to debunk some arguments for the flat earth by essentially ignoring the arguments and just sticking with their lifelong programming, that is a huge pitfall and a place that we don't want to see people go, which is why we're going out on a major limb, because it is socially unacceptable to go against the dogmas of science. We're going out on a limb trying to help people such as yourself, and we're met with absolute refusal to look at the evidence, and you painting yourself to be some valiant defender of the truth, when in fact you are a brainwashed defender of lies.
And I don't want people who are agnostic about this issue to fall on the side of illogic. And so that is why, despite how ridiculous flat earth conspiracies might seem to be, they are dangerous, and I think that we should still try and tackle them.
There you go again with the umpteenth time you've used the word conspiracy when you should have been using the word theory, or actually fact, but you're saying that it's essentially dangerous. It's a dangerous road for people to go down to scientifically analyze our surroundings. What are you so afraid of? Are you afraid of the truth being incompatible with your religion, which is scientism or globism? Then you say so hilariously,
And I don't want people who are agnostic about this issue to fall on the side of illogic.
Remind me again, where is your logic? Where is your measurement? Where is your evidence? You're merely trying to, and doing a very poor job, you're trying to debunk a few arguments that the Earth isn't a spinning sphere that are, conducive to a flat Earth model, doing a piss poor job of trying to debunk these arguments, yet you've provided zero evidence for a spinning spherical Earth, which is so typical because you just assume, you have all these preconceived notions that you assume to be true. And you could start with the universe, the Big Bang, the galaxy, the heliocentric model. See, all of these sort of things are ingrained into your paradigm, even though you have no first-hand evidence for this. And in fact, all of that jargon is mere theory. The Earth is the physical plane. The so-called universe are lights in the night sky, and all of astronomy has gotten it wrong forever. It's all based on Copernican principle theory, which the Copernican principle being is sort of a law of physics that the Earth must not hold any special or central place in the universe, and therefore anything that falls outside of that realm is deemed heretical to the religion of science. And it really is a shame that people, you're obviously not a stupid person, but you've been indoctrinated into this cult that harbors all sorts of absurd, illogical belief systems that are held together and stitched together by theory, conjecture, and even lies. That, my friend, is the dangerous road to go down.
But anyway, just before I go, I do want to say another
massive thank you for 20,000 subscribers. It is just ridiculous. It really is. Considering the amount of time that I've been doing this Cosmic Skeptic thing, it's crazy. I honestly cannot thank you enough. But like I say, next video is going to be a Q&A, so leave your questions below or send them to me on social media, which you can find my links here. And I'll try and get around to as many as I can. I love doing Q&A, so ask me anything you want. Doesn't matter how personal. If it's too personal something, I just won't answer it. So don't be afraid to ask whatever you want. I won't be offended.
Also, this video has just been purely rebuttals to flat Earth arguments. If you want some arguments which are actively in favour flavour of a globe Earth, Minute Physics has a great video, which again I'll leave in the description down below. Now I don't usually do this kind of thing, but it was actually quite fun. I'm still trying to figure out what kind of videos I want to make for this channel, so if you did like the video, do let me know. Let me know what kind of videos you want to see, because it really does help me out if I know what you guys actually want me to be putting out there, all 20,000 of you. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your feedback. Don't forget to subscribe. You can find me on social media here again. I've been Alex J. O'Connor, or Cosmic Skeptic. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
Yeah, hopefully in the next one you will actually try to attempt showing curvature and axial rotation at least, and then we can move ahead with orbital mechanics, gravity as a fallacy, dark matter not existing, and of course the Big Bang and everything else that you believe yet you have no evidence for and has actually been disproven. Yeah, so until next time, thank you all for watching. For those of you on the fence, I've put some links and cards throughout this video to reference materials that you can use in order to sort of get a better idea or understanding of some of the claims that I've made in this video. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a good happy holiday and a happy new year.